fall of Phnom Penh to the Khmer Rouge was met with rejoicing in the streets of the city. But within hours, the mood abruptly changed. The true extremism of Pol Pot's movement was revealed as orders were issued to evacuate the entire city of over 2 million people. Those too ill to move or those unwilling to go were summarily executed. Within weeks, only 10,000 key factory workers, soldiers and officials remained. The blowing up of the National Bank in the center of Phnom Penh symbolized the regime's contempt for money. It would not be needed in the new utopia. It was part of Pol Pot's radicalism, his desire to build the world's purest form of communism.
He picked the best bits of Chinese communism, the best Vietnamese communist ideas, and a little bit from France. He said that they did not apply communism properly 100%. For one example, he evacuated the people to the rural areas, and two, he eliminated money. That was to avoid corruption.
In this regime, even Pol Pot's family were not spared the evacuation.
Yes, I was shocked and surprised and very angry. We thought that the evacuation of the population was for peace, but instead it led to people being killed.
Not that the family knew who was responsible. Such was the paranoia and secrecy surrounding the regime that it would be years before most Cambodians knew who their rulers were. The government went under the sinister title of Angkar, the organization. Pol Pot himself was equally mysterious, hiding his role and his identity under his new name. Incredibly, it was only by chance and right at the end of the regime that his own brother discovered who was in charge of the government.
We did not know where he had disappeared to. We only heard that the government was led by Pol Pot, and we didn't know who that was until 1979. We were eating in the communal eating room when we saw his picture, and we recognized that it was him.
The evacuated former city dwellers were rapidly put to use, working on agricultural communes. It was a radical experiment in which the country would be purified, starting again from year zero. Not just money and city dwelling were abolished, but also markets, schools, hospitals, religion and private property. At the heart of everything was rice production and the rural poor.
We believed that development should start in the rural areas because there was a lot of land, millions and millions of hectares, and more than 90% of the manpower was there.
But the methods used were vicious and counterproductive. The first 5-year plan sought to triple rice production without modern tools or methods. Using malnourished slave labor, living in pitiful conditions on massive collective farms, it was a disaster, with many tens of thousands dying of starvation and overwork. Those seen as being disloyal, not hard-working enough, or guilty of such minor offenses as hunting rats for food, could be taken away and murdered. There's little doubt that the plan, its brutality and its failures owed much to Pol Pot.
He was the leader of the Communist Party. He could issue orders to be obeyed in every aspect of the country: politics, economics, military, culture, foreign affairs, just like in any other communist country.
The mass starvation and economic failures led Pol Pot to one conclusion. Not that his plans didn't work, but that internal enemies must be to blame. A former secondary school in Phnom Penh became the leading center for purging senior officials. At least 15,000 people were taken here to Tuol Sleng. Fewer than 10 emerged alive. The victims usually had mugshots taken before being tortured and executed. One of the photographers remembers the all-enveloping fear that even favored cadres like him felt.
The
prisoners rarely came out alive from Tuol Sleng, but even our lives belonged to the organization as well. We knew what was wrong, what was right, but could not say anything. It was the organization who made the decisions. It could do anything. There was no freedom at the time, and we had to listen to it.
For the man at the center of the killings, there was little change from the figure he'd cut 20 years before when impressing youthful students.
He always had the same character. There wasn't much change. He was always strong, stable, calm. I never saw him lose his temper. Even if he wanted to kill someone, he still looked happy.
It was in stark contrast to the behavior of his wife. She'd shown signs of increasing mental illness since the early 1970s, obsessed with fears that the Vietnamese were trying to kill her. She and her husband now rarely met. But Pol Pot did share one thing with his wife, a hatred of the Vietnamese. Still resentful at having been treated as a junior partner by the Viet Cong, he ordered the army to attack Vietnam. Knowing his troops were completely outnumbered, he declared that as long as each killed 30 Vietnamese soldiers, they would win the war. On Christmas Day 1978, the Vietnamese struck back. Within 2 weeks, the Khmer Rouge regime collapsed. Pol Pot had been in power 3 years, 8 months and 20 days. He'd practically destroyed the country's social and economic fabric and left up to a quarter of the population dead. In later years, Pol Pot, according to one of his private secretaries, expressed few regrets for his part in the destruction of Cambodia, instead blaming the people.
He said that there might be one big mistake that he had made. He relied mostly on the poor peasant. When the poor peasant has some power, military power or political power, they use it in a very, very different way, in a very, very bad way. And that is very, very dangerous. And I remember that he always focused on this point.
But the Vietnamese invasion wasn't the end of Pol Pot and the Khmer Rouge. Even while the bones of the killing fields continued to be unearthed in their hundreds of thousands, the politics of the Cold War saved him from retribution. China didn't want its old ally captured and tried, while the Americans saw the Khmer Rouge guerrillas in northern Cambodia as a useful tool to tie the Vietnamese down. For the next 18 years, Pol Pot lived once again in the jungle, his army continuing to fight a determined and brutal war. But the withdrawal of Hanoi's troops in 1989 and the Paris Peace Conference that followed signaled the beginning of the end for Pol Pot and the Khmer Rouge as a serious political force.
He was too old physically, mentally as well. He cannot be as sharp as before.
Defections accelerated in the 1990s, and even Pol Pot's famed ability to persuade and encourage waned as he became more and more ill. Further infighting saw Pol Pot overreach himself in ordering the killing of a senior official, and he was put under house arrest in 1997. Less than a year later, he was dead, probably of heart disease. Mourned by the second wife he'd married in 1986 and his daughter. He was cremated at this forlorn site near the Thai border on a pile of rubbish and car tires. But such is the level of devotion he inspired that for some his death in 1998 is still an occasion for sadness.
I
was very sorry I was not next to him, but I knew that this time would come because he was ill and had heart problems. It is the law of nature, we have to accept it.
I feel very sad. I feel very sad.
That's not a sadness shared by many. Even senior figures like brother number 2, Nun Chie, now facing trial for war crimes and crimes against humanity, acknowledges mistakes were made. Though characteristically, like Pol Pot himself always did, he denies direct responsibility.
Yes. I do have a lot of remorse and a lot of regret. It should not have happened like this. It was not our intention. We did try very hard, but unfortunately what happened was beyond our control.
In his later years, Pol Pot said his regime had actually left a positive legacy in the many dikes and canals it had built, and had revived national patriotism. But the paddy fields he had made were constructed on the bodies of the Cambodian people, and the patriotism he fostered produced a disastrous war with the national enemy. The truth is, he came closer to destroying his country than anyone else, both economically and spiritually. And the brutal means he used to pursue his hopelessly unrealistic ends mean history will almost certainly label him as both evil and incompetent.